Okay, so this is going to be a pretty short and basic tutorial on how to do a couple things in Excel. The first thing that I want to talk about is sorting. So just to orient you to what this is a data set from an ecology class that I taught, and we have a bunch of data here where each row is a different data point, which is pretty common. That's often going to be the case for you too. Each column is a different variable. So these are about galls, which are little bulbous outgrowths in goldenrods, a plant. And anyway, each of these represents a single plant that was cut and measured. And the gall is like the little bulb, and they measured how high up the stem it was, and how wide the gall was, and how thick the wall was, and what was inside of it, and perhaps what predated upon it. So that's just to orient you to the data. So I picked this data set because you can see there are both continuous and categorical variables. And so I'm going to show you how to work with both of those. So the first thing that you really need to know how to do is sort. So the way you want to sort is by highlighting your data set like this. And then on mine, so I have a Mac. It sometimes looks a little bit different in Windows, but the basic gist is the same. So you want to go up to data, and there's more than one way to do most of the things I'm going to show you. This is just how I happen to do it. So go up to data and sort, and then it'll ask you which column you want to sort by. And so one thing I want you to notice is in my data set, the first row is the name of the variables. That is what it's saying here. My list has headers. So when my list has headers is checked, that tells Excel not to include row 1 when it's sorting, to leave row 1 as it is. So if I uncheck this, you'll see that now the first row is included in the highlighting, but I don't want it to be included in the sorting. In other words, I don't want my labels to get sorted with my data, so I want that checked. All right, so then it's going to ask you which column you want to sort by and how you want to sort it. So I could sort a bunch of different ways. Let's say I want to sort by gall diameter. In other words, I want to show, let's see, so that would be column C, but because I've told it my list has headers, it actually takes my name. So I'll say, okay, I want to sort by gall diameter. I want to sort on the values, and then do I want it to go smallest to largest or largest to smallest? Typically I'll want one of those. Let's say I want to go largest to smallest. So I can click OK, and you'll see that the data are going to change. So now all the rows have been rearranged. You can see that it no longer goes, no longer starts at 1 and goes up now. It's ordered by gall diameter with the largest counting down. All right, so I'm going to undo for a second so we can go back to the original data set. You'll see that some numbers are missing here because I deleted some just so that it would all fit on one screen. Okay, so that I want you to notice that I sorted this way by highlighting it all. It's very dangerous, I mean as dangerous as any spreadsheet can be. It's dangerous to highlight one row, one column, and then sort, like so A to Z also means sort. But watch what happens when I do this. So in this version of Excel, it will give me a warning, right? Like it'll say, only selected data will be sorted. Is that really what you want to do? Now, old versions of Excel will not give you that warning. It will just do it. So the reason that this is tricky is what it's asking is, do you really want to sort by only gall diameter, which would actually isolate gall diameter from all the other variables? So what I mean is, if we look at gall 2 here, gall 2 has a gall diameter of 2.31 and a wall thickness of 7.4, etc. A gall height of 66.4. We want this box, let me cancel this for a second. We want this box to go with this box, to go with this box, etc. Like we want this whole row to stay together because it all came from the same gall. It's all part of a single data point, basically. We don't want those to get separated. And if I just sorted by this column and I said, oh yes, continue with the current selection, watch the other columns when I sort this. Note that they did not change. But now gall diameter is sorted, and I told it to sort small to large. But these didn't change, so it kind of separated this data point from the rest. Now, you might be thinking, why does that matter? And I will tell you a very real story about why that matters. My first year teaching, many moons ago, it was an amateur hour apparently, because I had my grade book like this and I was interested in what the scores looked like for a certain exam. So I sorted by exam score so I could see, what were the highest scores and the lowest, etc. But I sorted just one column, so it separated everybody's scores from their names, which is terrible. So in other words, now my names were in alphabetical order and my scores were in descending order, and I had basically removed any connection between a person's name and what score they'd gotten. It was not good. So you generally don't want to sort like that. So I'm going to undo. Fortunately, this version of Excel, it has a warning to prevent that. So this is what it's asking me here. It's saying, do you really want to do that, or do you want to expand the selection and sort everything? So let's say, okay, we want to expand the selection. Now it highlights everything for us. All right, so that's how to sort by one thing. Now we could also sort by a categorical variable. I just want to show you how we could do that. So I actually, you don't have to highlight it yourself because it'll do it for you, but I want to get in the habit of doing that. So let's say I want to sort by, whoops, I didn't highlight everything. Oh, right, you want to highlight all your data. So actually that was an interesting thing that you just saw. So I didn't highlight my headers, but then when I told it to sort, it thinks, so I have my list has headers checked, which means it thinks my first highlighted row is headers, but my first highlighted row was not headers, so then I would uncheck it. So you basically just want to look at what you're doing and make sure that whether this is checked or not reflects what you have highlighted. So in this case, I have not included my headers. So I don't really I want to actually go back and include them so it can use the names of my columns. All right, so yes, my list has headers. So I want to sort by, let's sort by any WASP. And A to Z, sure. So now it sorts, you can see it's sorting by this column where it's grouped all the data points that have no, and then it groups all the data points that have yes. So that was pretty easy. Let's sort by this one because I want to show you something. Let's sort by late WASP. Oh, it didn't work. All right, forget that. Never mind. Okay, so let's see what. Oh, so I wanted to show you how to sort by two things, right? So let's sort by. Let's say I want to know how many were predated upon by. How many were predated upon by a wasp, and it was a late wasp. So I would say, okay, first, did they have any wasp? Then I also, after that, I want to sort by late wasp. So then I add a column, and it says sort first by this column, then by this column. So what you'll see is first it sorts by any wasp. Here are my no's and then my yeses. But then it sorts by late wasp such that within my yeses, all the no's for late wasp are together and all the yeses for late wasp are together, right? So I can quickly look at all of the galls that were both predated upon by a wasp and it was a late wasp. So that's how to sort by multiple columns. You could, if you had like a list of names, let's say you had a list of some kind of student data set and you wanted to say like, okay, I want to sort by final grade, and then within that I want within each final grade, I want to sort alphabetically. So in other words, show me all the people who got an A, but within all the people who got an A, I want to alphabetize those people. You would first sort by grade, then sort by last name. So multiple levels of sorting can be very useful. All right, so the next thing I want to show you is how to take an average. Now, I think most of you guys know how to do this. So the formula function in Excel is great. There are lots of different ways to do it. Again, you can use the formula bar up here. You can even just type right in an empty cell. I tend to like to do that, but they're both the same. To tell Excel that you want to do a formula, you hit the equals button, and that says, hey Excel, I'm about to type a formula, right? So let's say I want to take the average of a column, like for example, maybe I want the average gall diameter. So I would type AV, and it prompts you with different formulas it has that it thinks you might want. So you click on average, that's the one you want, which really means mean. It really bothers me that Excel does not call it the mean, but that's okay. All right, so you then highlight the cells you want it to include in the calculation. So for example, gall diameter, you highlight that, and then it closes the parentheses for you, as you can see. Hit return, and it tells you, so our average gall diameter is 1.959. Now if you forget what this represents, you can double click it and it'll show you the formula. You didn't need to do that because if you look, the formula is up here. Even when it shows the value, the formula is up in the formula bar as long as you have it, as long as this is checked so that you're viewing it. Okay, so that's the average. That's pretty easy. You can also do the standard deviation. That is STDEV. And again, you highlight. So in that case, the standard deviation of the gall data set, the gall diameter is 0.35, it's 0.36. All right, so that's to do the average and the standard deviation. Now another thing that Excel can do is count things. So in a small data set like this, you might be tempted to count things manually. Like let's say I wanted to know how many galls seem to be predated upon by a woodpecker. Well, in this small data set, there are only 26 data points. It would be really easy to just count by hand, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Great. But if your data set were larger, say a couple hundred data points, or in the case of one of my own research projects, 10,000 data points, you obviously don't want to and shouldn't count things by hand. It's both time consuming, inefficient, and inaccurate. So in that case, you want to use the count function. So I like to use COUNTIF, where you say to Excel, count if something, right? Like you're saying, count if my criteria that I'm going to specify are met. So count if, and then see how here it has these things that it's prompting you with? That's Excel telling you what information it needs. So in this case, Excel is saying, what is the range of data you're interested in looking at, and what are the criteria you want me to look for? So I want it to look at this column, and then it shows you the punctuation you need to separate. So see how it says range, comma? That means you need to highlight the range, and then you need to type a comma. Now notice how then when I typed the comma, it shifted to black. The criteria was bolded instead of range. If you don't have the comma, it thinks you're still talking about the range. So in other words, the word that is bolded is what it is currently asking you for and what you are telling it, whether you want to or not. So like if I forgot to do my comma and I started to type my criteria, if range is still in bold, then it is still interpreting whatever I'm typing as a range. So okay, so like put my comma bold, so it's saying, okay, I'm looking now for your criteria. If you want to look for an exact word, like exact text, you need to put that in quotes. So let's say I want it to count how many times it says woodpecker. 5, right? Which matches up with what we counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Great. See, it worked. Now we could also then very easily go back and replace just this word. Whoops, I typed it. I didn't type it right. And as you can see, if you type something incorrectly, it will count literally what you've told it. I accidentally added an R, spoiler, and it found 0. Okay, so it did a good job, but that's not what I want, right? I want beetle. So it found 4 beetles. So once again, that's highlighting the fact that you need to type it exactly correctly. Now, this also brings up the point I had mentioned in class, I think, which is you need to type things the same way. So like, I think this works. Let me check. If I type that in caps, oh no, it's still counting it. Okay, sometimes there are certain situations where if you do something in all caps, it will count it differently, and you don't want it to do that. So in general, you want to keep everything like lowercase if possible, or all uppercase. Just be consistent. Okay, so that's the COUNTIF function. That is very useful because you don't need to be counting things on your screen with your finger or your cursor. Okay, we did that, we did that, we did that. And so the last thing I want to show you is about t-tests. So you can do a t-test in Excel. Just make sure, so as you learned already, a t-test compares a categorical variable with a continuous variable. But actually the way I said that was incorrect. I just said it compares a categorical variable with a continuous variable. That is not true. It is not comparing one variable to another. It is comparing different levels of the categorical variable with respect to the continuous variable. So here's what I mean. Let's look at some of my data here. I have a bunch of categorical variables here, right? I have, all of these are categorical variables. Let's look at predator, yes or no. That's my categorical variable. So let's say, I'll write this question up. Let's say we're doing a t-test and we're comparing, and we want to know, does diameter thickness vary between galls that were predated upon and galls that weren't? So there's my question, right? So what am I looking at here? I'm looking at diameter thickness. And I'm looking at predator. Okay, so I'm going to highlight these just so that you know that we're talking about that. So those are my two variables, and you can see one is categorical, that's predator, and one is continuous, that's gall diameter. So here's what's tricky. Many people are tempted when they go to do their t-test to compare this column to this column. But that's not correct because that's comparing apples and oranges and it doesn't really make sense. How can you compare a diameter to a yes or no, right? Like how can you compare a number to a letter? That doesn't make sense. But it's tricky because when you go to do a t-test, like if you do t-test, the t-test function, t.test, it will ask you for 2 arrays of data. And it is a very common mistake to have this be one array of data and this be another array. Because you're like, okay, those are my 2 variables, right? So let me show you what happens if I do that. I'm going to get an error. Oops, sorry. I didn't give it all its information. Let's see. Okay, so here's the error I got. Now, again, that's because I asked it to compare numbers to letters. So if you really understand a t-test, then you should have noticed that I don't actually want to compare diameter to predator, right? I want to compare the diameters of the yeses to the diameters of the no's. So I'm actually comparing diameter diameters to other diameters. But I need to sort to do that, right? That's why I've taught you how to sort, because right now predators are all mixed up in the yeses and the nos. And I want all the yeses together and all the nos together. So first, let's sort by predator. You want to sort by your categorical variable. So in this case, that's predator, right? And my continuous variable is gall diameter. All right, so first sort by gall diameter. Nope, that's not right. Sort by predator. And I want to actually get rid of this other one, so I'm going to hit the minus. I only want to sort by predator, yes or no, right? Okay, so now I have my no's together and my yeses together. So what I want to do is I want to compare the diameters of these to the diameters of these. So I do equals t-test. Now I don't ever actually enter these data because the yeses and the nos are going to be implied by the way I divide up the arrays. So when it says array 1, it wants to know the diameters for the first group, which is my nos. So I highlight these, right? Now again, it tells you what punctuation it needs to separate things, to separate the arguments. So it wants a comma. Now it's telling you to do array 2. So now I do this and it makes them a different color. And now it asks you for how many tails and the type. You guys don't need to worry about that, that's kind of beyond the scope of our class. Always do 2 tails for our class, and I believe we want type 3. Oops. Type 3. So I hit return. Again, this is what it's thinking about. So it's saying, is there a difference between these diameters and these? Now in Max, the stat output for t-tests and chi-squares for that matter, but we're talking about t-tests, is terrible. It gives you only a p-value, and it doesn't even tell you it's a p-value. It just gives you a number. It's atrocious. It makes me hate Excel, but that's okay. So it just gives you a p-value. That's what this is. So this difference is, there's not a significant difference between diameters of galls that were predated upon and those that weren't. But if you're using a Mac, I encourage you to try the test on a different computer or an online t-test, because to report a t-test, you don't just need the p-value, you also need the t-test statistic value, the t-value, and the degrees of freedom. So make sure you get those as well. Okay, so that concludes this tutorial, and good luck.